But you can probably
Thank you.
You can probably see in the background that I didn't bring with me my whole shas to Devon. I didn't bring with me my whole library. So you can see in the background just some of the beams of the cottage that we're staying in. And okay, let's continue where we left off last week. Just to remind you, we're in the middle of one of the most profound episodes of Sefer Bereshis, is how to understand the psukim which deal with Adam and Chava, the first man and woman that we are familiar with in the Torah. And clearly the story of Adam and Chava is not just about two individuals, but the Torah is giving us this account of the nature of mankind, the nature of humanity, and the way mankind relates both to nature on the one hand, and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the other hand, and to himself or herself. All these issues are dealt with here in this original story. And I've also mentioned to you that the Torah looks at the story of Adam and Eve in Gan Eden. If we look at it as we do through the eyes of Chazal and of the Meforshim, it's a completely different picture to the story usually told in the non-Jewish Western Christian world of the original sin, the fall of man, and paradise lost. This is not really the Jewish story. The Jewish story is about a deep understanding of the challenges, the spiritual challenges facing every human being. There are several very fascinating themes here which emerge. I'm going to share the text with you and show you one or two very fascinating parts of the text that we're looking at. Let's see if this screen share works. Second. Right. You see it? Can you see a text? Yes? Excellent. Okay. So one of the interesting themes behind the story here, something which I've seen in the Meforshim. In fact, I remember on several occasions hearing Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. It's still hard for me to say Zichrono Livracha, I'll be quite honest with you. Rabbi Sachs discussing at some length this particular aspect of it. So he was interested in the fact that there is a striking contrast here between the power of seeing as opposed to the power of hearing. And this, he once gave a whole shir, I remember, in front of the Rabbanim in one of the pre-Rosh Hashanah Chief Rabbi conferences about throughout the Tanakh, the power of seeing as opposed to the power of hearing. And we see already here from the very beginning that the Aveira of the Eitz Hadas is connected to Vateire. Can you see this? Vateire Ha'isha, that she saw a power of seeing, showed her a tree, and that tree was Ta'ava Hi Le'einayim. It was irresistible to her sight. The Ta'ava Le'einayim. In other words, that the human being has a power of sight, which is crucial for living, but actually the power of sight gives us the world of appearances, a superficial world, and a world which contains within it all types of distractions and seductive images. An idea of seeing connected to ta'ava, ta'ava meaning desire. So we have here the voice of irresistible desire, which Chava succumbs to the irresistible desire, but it's focused on the Vateire. And contrast that with the next pasuk here, which we looked at last time, Vayishmu es kol Hashem. Can you see here? It says Vayishmu. The next pasuk speaks about what did they hear? They heard the kol Hashem Elokim mishalech bagan. They were in Gan Eden and they heard the voice of God. So he says this whole drama is if you like, a conflict between what they see and what they heard. And in actual fact, the whole of the message of Torah revolves around that, if you like, conflict between the world that we see and the world that we hear. And here is not necessarily only meant to be an audio experience. To hear means to understand. To hear a message is to understand. And in fact, it's used in the Tanakh often to mean understand. The primary source of that, of course, is when we're saying the Shema. When we say Shema Yisrael, we don't mean that we're actually listening to an audio experience of any sort. We're not hearing any messages through our ears. The Shema is the hearing, which is the hearing of understanding, to understand something. Actually, it's very interesting. I always found it interesting that Klal Yisrael have the minhag. It's not a halacha, but it's a minhag over the years that when we say the Shema, we cover our eyes. What is that about? Why are we covering our eyes when we're saying the Shema? This is something which is, even the youngest child knows that, but who understands properly the meaning of this particular minhag? And to understand that minhag, you have to understand this narrative in Bereshis chapter 3, where it is the sight which leads Chava astray, and it is the hearing which brings them back into the world of God. In other words, the voice of God is not seen, and the presence of God is not something which we can connect to through our powers of sight, only through our powers of hearing and hearing and understanding, right? And indeed, when we speak about, for example, learning Torah, the same b'libeinu lahovin ulahaskil lishmoya lilmod ulalamed. So the word lishmoya comes in a list of cognitive activities. Lahovin ulahaskil lishmoya lilmod ulalamed, right? So lishmoya is to listen and to understand, and the art of listening is harder than one would normally think it to be. Listening doesn't just mean to pick up audio signals, but listening means to have a deep understanding which is divorced from the world that you see. So in order to emphasize that we're living in the world of hearing and not in the world of seeing, we put our hands over our eyes and we say Shema, and we're saying we cannot see the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through using our eyes. Our eyes are vital for us to live, but in actual fact, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hidden and is absent from this world in terms of sight. And indeed, the Torah emphasizes this in several places. I'll just bring one of them, which we're all familiar with, which is in the third paragraph of the Shema, where the Torah says, "V'loi sosuru acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem." V'lo sosuru acharei levavchem einechem. The pasuk there is saying, your eyes, right, will lead you astray. What you see has the potential to lead you astray, and that the emphasis of the Torah is to hear and to understand and to engage in listening to the Dvar Hashem. So when, for example, we have Kriyas HaTorah in Shul, we are engaged in Lishmoa Dvar Hashem. We're engaged in the mitzvah of listening and hearing, and that is the primary human activity in order to engage with a spiritual world and not the world of seeing. What's interesting is that this was also the the Rabbi Sachs used to emphasize that this was really the one of the contrasting features between Jewish life on the one hand and pagan life on the other hand. Pagan life was all about icons and idols, right? And in fact, the Ten Commandments immediately speaks about, right? Be careful of statues and pictures and images which will lead you astray. And Jewish life has always been very nervous about any pictures and images and statues of any sort, such that in a shul we're not going to have any pictures of anybody or any statues of anybody or anything like that at all, because that is clearly appealing to the eyes rather than to the ears. And this contrast is already there from the very beginning. This contrast is there from the very beginning in the difference between Vateire Ha'isha, the woman sees the tree and is overcome by the temptation of the beauty of the Ta'ava Hi La'inayim. Ta'ava Hi La'inayim, the eyes triggered off the Ta'ava, triggered off the desire, as opposed to they then realize, right? They then realize that the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only accessible through Vayishmu, that they heard the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mishalech Began Ruach Hayom. So we looked at a couple of Mefroshim here. I'd like to have a look for a moment at the Abarbanel. I think we touched on the Abarbanel at the end of the last year, but we didn't really look at it properly. The Abarbanel, who of course is writing about 500 years ago, who lived through the expulsion from Spain and wrote a very profound commentary on the entire Tanakh. So the first thing he says is very interesting. He says, Kafib, and I think there's a little bit of an anti-Christian element, a bit of a polemic element in his first line. He says, Kafib Pshuto, if you read these psukim simply, Efshel Farish Ba'od, we can understand something additional here. Shabola Hodia, it comes to teach us, Sha'odom, that man and woman, Gam Acharei Cheto, even after the sin, Shama Kol Eloki, they were still able to hear the voice of God. In other words, in the Christian account of the original sin, after they'd done the sin, they were damned and they couldn't anymore connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The sin disconnected mankind from God, according to the Christian narrative. But the Barbanel says, just look at the Psukim. The Psukim say that they committed the sin, and immediately afterwards, they heard the voice of God in the gap. So he says, Kilo nimna mimena nevuah b'merido. Even though b'merido, the last word here, b'merido, can you see this last word here? Merido means mered. Mered means a good word for mered. Their rebellion, right? They rebelled against the word of God, right? But nevertheless, lo nimna mehem, says their Barbanel. It's important to notice, lo nimna mimenu nevuah b'merido. They didn't lose their power of nevuah, even though they had sinned. So I think he's coming, as I say, to engage in a polemic against the Christian and the generally accepted non-Jewish version of this story, that the original sin somehow disconnected man from God forever. And then he says something else. He says, there are two supporting reasons. In other words, they were in Gan Eden, and Gan Eden was a place of Kedusha. So he says the Torah is already coming to introduce to us this idea that in planet Earth, even though it would appear that all places, all geographical locations are the same, right? It's not true. If you're living in Jerusalem or you're living in Devon, there's a difference. Some places are more conducive to hearing the voice of God. So he says, in Gan Eden, this was a place, Shahamokom Shoya Omad Shop, the place where they were, Gorab Lo Shlemus Hanavuyahu, Avshalo Hoya Odom Roy Elov Vipascheto, even though he had sinned. Nevertheless, for Omrim is Halech Bagan, because see, the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in Gan Eden, but Tzelemus Hashemas Kadosh Emelakim V'lo Meno Mizeh. He wasn't prevented from communicating with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says. There is such a thing as the Kedusha of a place. And that's why Klal Yisrael have always had this very powerful theme of, on the one hand, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is accessible everywhere, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Molei Kol Ha'olam Kavodo. The presence of God is eternal and omnipresent. Nevertheless, there are places of greater Kedusha. And places of greater Kedusha are places where, in some sense, not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there more than he's anywhere else, but he's more accessible to us. In other words, there are places where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more accessible, notably in a Mokom Kodesh, right? So, for example, a Beit HaKnesses or a Beit HaMedrash is a Mokom Kodesh. It has been consecrated. Similarly, for example, Yerushalayim, particularly Harabayis, and places like that are consecrated places where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more accessible to us. And similarly, there are other places like Kivrei Tzadikim, according to the more Kabbalistic understanding. Kivrei Tzadikim has a certain power to make HaKadosh Baruch Hu more accessible to us. Not that he's more present there, but we can connect better in places of Kedusha. So in that sense, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are in Yerushalayim, you are better equipped to understand these psukim than I am sitting here in Devon. So I have a little bit of Rahmanas on me in Devon. I'm struggling to get through on a long distance call to these psukim, whereas for you, it's a local call to get through to the meaning of these psukim. We're talking about listening, so you can hear the message of the psukim in Yerushalayim better than I can here in Devon, but we'll do it together. We'll help each other. And then he goes on to say, V'hasibah hasheni, the second reason, says the Abarbanel, the Ruach Hayom, because the Pasuk says it was the Ruach Hayom, says Ruach Hushem leNevuah. Right? The word Ruach has an ambiguity to it throughout the Torah. Ruach means, of course, wind, but Ruach also means Ruchniut, also means the spirit. Right? When Moshe Rabbeinu chooses Yehoshua as his successor, right? As we saw in Parshas Pinchas, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Kachas Yehoshua, appoint Yehoshua, Ish Asher Ruach Bo. He's a man of Ruach. Ruach meaning here of a great spirit. He's a man with a great spiritual power, right? And we speak about Ruchnius as a general term for spirituality. Right, so it was a special. So he says there is kedushas in Ein Kain. He says shtei sibas kedushas hamokum umalas hayom. So we see already from the very beginning, says the Abraham of the Torah, that there, in addition to kedusha being sort of a sanctity, something which resides within the neshama of the individual, as we saw earlier, when man and woman were created, they had a Selem Elokim implanted within them. So that is, they were given a chip, a certain spiritual chip inside the human being, which enabled them to connect with spiritual ideas and a spiritual life. But in addition to that, there is Kedushat HaMakom and Kedushat HaZman. There is Kedusha both in certain places and certain times, right? So the Kedusha on Shabbos, the Kedusha on Yom Tov, the Kedusha on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it is the times, right, which give us additional access to Kedusha, and the place, right? And therefore, and these are the three dimensions. The Mekubalim speak about three dimensions of Kedusha. If those of you who read some of the writings of the Baratanya, for example, or Sfas Emes, or Hasidus in general, and Kabbalistic texts, they speak about Olam Shana Nefesh, Ayin Shin Nun. You might sometimes come across the Ayin Shin Nun Rosh Tevas, the acrostic. Olam Shana Nefesh is a reference to these three dimensions of Ruchnius, which we connect to in the Torah. Olam means the world, meaning the place. In the world, there are certain places which are more conducive. Shana means the time. In the year, there are certain times that are more conducive. And Nefesh, meaning within one's soul, there is a source of Kedusha. And Olam, Shana, Nefesh, these three dimensions of our connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when they're synchronized with each other, that is when we can properly connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if you're in a day like Shabbos, in a place like a Beis HaKnesses or in Yerushalayim, and you are focused on some aspect of spiritual life, then you have Olam, Shana, Nefesh in sync with each other. The time, the place, and the state of mind. Those are the three dimensions which you already find here. The Abarbanel draws our attention to this already from the very beginning. Adam and Chava are gifted with a Tzelem Elokim. They are also in Gan Eden, which has a special conducive spiritual power to it. And it is L'Ruach Hayom. The day is also an important day. So this is what the Abarbanel wants us to grasp. Let's move on now for a minute. And this is a pasuk we touched on last week already. Vayikra Hashem Elokim ala Adam vayom lo ayeka. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to Adam and Chava and says to them, Ayeka, where are you? And I pointed out last time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not asking them because he doesn't know where they are. He's asking them, where do you think you are now? What do you think you have achieved? Where do you think you are? I know where you are, but where do you think you are? And I've also pointed out to you something which is relevant for this week, right? That on this week, on Motzei Shabbos, we're going to be sitting on the ground and reading Eicha. And Eicha has got the same spelling as this word, right? This word Eicha, Ayeka, is a word which has multiple levels of meaning to it. The word Ayeka also spells the word Eicha, which means really, how could it possibly be? That's what the word Eicha means. The word Eicha, as the first word of the book of Lamentations, written by Yirmiyahu Hanavi, means Eicha, how could it possibly be? It's beyond comprehension that such a thing could possibly happen. And that is also part of the meaning here of this pasuk. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Adam and Eve, Ayeka, how could it possibly be that somebody created with such a powerful neshama, put in such a beautiful place, could have deteriorated so badly? So it's a rhetorical question, really. It's a rhetorical question. It's not a question looking for an answer. It's a question expressing amazement and sadness. That's what Ayeka expresses, that idea. A sad expression of how could you possibly have such a disaster take place. Okay, we looked at a couple of these psukim here. So they said, as Shamati Bagon, right? So again, we have Adam saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that your voice, Shamati, right? The operative word is Lishmoa, right? I heard your voice. And as soon as I heard your voice, I heard the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I realized that I was naked. And I mentioned to you last time that naked here doesn't only mean naked in the sense of unclothed, but the Chazal say Erom means naked of mitzvahs, naked of any zechus. And here comes another interesting thing. Who told you are naked? Hamin ha'etz. Right, so here we have an interesting pasuk. Have you eaten from the tree I told you not to eat? In other words, he wants Adam and Chava. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu asking them this? He knows exactly what they've done. but he wants them to in some way engage in the first stage of tshuva, which is vidui. He wants them to confess what they've done wrong. We'll speak about that in a minute. But before we do so, there's something in this pasuk which I'd like to quote. Some of you maybe are old enough to have heard some of Rabbi Isaac Bernstein's shiurim. And Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, who was a very close friend of mine, Zechron Livracha, a wonderful teacher and a very special person. There was something here that he liked very much. There is in the Gemara. There is in the Gemara a very interesting midrashic line, right, which is speaking about Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther, and in Megillas Esther, right, we all know that the arch villain of Megillas Esther was Haman, and the Gemara asks the question, Haman min haTorah minayin. Where in the Chumash is there a remez? Of course, Haman lived millennia after the Torah was given, but Haman lived 1,000 years after Matan Torah, but the Gemara is asking midrashically, everything is hinted at in the Torah. Where is Haman hinted at in the Torah? So the Gemara brings this pasuk, right? This pasuk which says, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks, Adam and Chava, have you eaten from the tree? So where in this pasuk is Haman hinted at? This word here, right? There is a word here, hamin ha'etz. So hamin ha'etz, if you read it without the punctuation, right? The word hey mem nun spells the word Haman. So the Torah uses here, can you understand? The Medrash is using a midrashic form of interpretation, saying that here in this pasuk, Haman is mentioned, right? But if we look at it a bit more deeply, what is the connection here? Does anyone like to suggest what could possibly be here thematically? What could be the connection between this event and Haman? I don't know if anybody remembers this about Torah, Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, or could think of a connection. There's a very interesting connection here. If anybody can remember it or think of something, I'll be happy to hear it. But so Rabbi Isaac said, I'm not sure that if he said it in anybody's name or not, but I remember him saying it. So he said that Haman says in Megillas Esther, he says, look at me, I am supremely wealthy and supremely powerful, right? He was in the whole Persian Empire, he was the most powerful and wealthy person in the world. And then he says something amazing. He says, V'chol zeh einenu shover li. But it's all worth nothing to me when I see the Mordechai Yehudi who is not bowing down to me. And his friends, his wife and his friends try to tell him, but look, the entire known universe bows down to you. Wherever you go, everyone bows down to you. But he says, no, it's all worthless to me because there's this one guy who doesn't bow down to me, right? So Isaac Bernstein said, this is exactly what happened to Adam and Chava. We spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, that they were given the Olam Umaloyo, they were given the entire universe, right? Mikol eitz hagan ochal tochal. You can eat from every tree in the Gan, meaning the whole world is at your disposal, but there's this one thing that you can't have, and they became obsessed with the one thing they couldn't have. They became obsessed with it. They couldn't get away from that one temptation, and that's exactly what Haman says. Haman says, I've got everything in the world. There's no more wealth or power or honor that I could possibly get, but there's this one man who I can't get him out of my head. And he will come lokom v'lo zo. Whenever I turn up, he stands erect and he makes a whole production out of not bowing down to me, right? And I can't bear that. And he said, so that's what Rabbi Isaac said, Zechariah Nebracha, that was really an interesting connection. That's what the Gemara means. When it says Hamin ha'etz is Haman, it means that it's not just a play on words, but actually the downfall of Adam and Chava was because of that weakness of human nature to become obsessed with the forbidden fruit, to become obsessed with something which is forbidden to you, and not being able to put that aside and focus on all the wonderful opportunities and experiences which are permitted. Okay, so let's move on now for a minute. Okay, so here comes now a very interesting part of the whole story, and that is, what is the reaction of Adam when he's challenged by God? Have you eaten from the tree? So he says, Adam. What does he say in his defense? He says, Ha'isha asher nosata imodi, he nosna li min ha'etz va'ochal. He says, the woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit of this tree and I ate it. What's happening here in this pasuk? Something very interesting. Something very, very interesting that Adam Rishon is saying. What is he saying here? Does anyone like to summarize in one sentence? What is he saying here? Dina, what do you want? What's your thought?
Blaming, he's placing the blame on somebody else.
Right. Saying it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. He's shifting the blame onto somebody else. And this really is seen by the Mepharshim as, in a sense, a greater sin than actual eating the forbidden fruit of God. When he realized he'd done something wrong, he shifts the responsibility for it onto somebody else. He doesn't take responsibility for his own action. Incidentally, of course, when the woman is challenged, she does the same thing. In the next pasuk, what happens in the next pasuk? We'll discuss that in detail. The next pasuk is right. And then the woman, what have you done? And she says, the serpent, he fooled me into eating this tree.
Rabbi Kimche, can I interrupt, Rabbi Kimche?
Yes.
There's a lot of distortion in your sound. All of a sudden, makes it difficult to understand you. Can I suggest you leave and then enter again?
You're not getting any sound?
Yes, it's very distorted.
Really? Okay. I'll do that. So ladies and gentlemen, you've got a 30-second break from me. And we're going to second. I'll do this.
I'm sorry about that. Let's see whether Rabbi Kimche can come in again without that awful distortion. He's in again.
I'm hoping that now my voice comes over a bit clearer. Yes, a little bit clearer. This seems to be the universal solution. I wish all of life was so simple as the IT. Simply, you switch it off and switch it on again. I don't know why that seems to work, but that's how it is. I wish people were so simple. You could switch them off and switch them on again, and we get a fresh start. But there it is. Getting a fresh start seems to work with the IT perfectly well, 90% of the time. And Maybe that's all they teach people in IT. When you get a degree in IT, maybe that's all they're taught every day. They're taught exactly the same class. When there's a problem, switch it off and switch it on. Okay. But it's better now, Ellie, right? It's better?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Good, good, excellent, excellent. So what were we looking at? We're looking at right. So we're looking at what is the response of Adam and Chava when they are challenged. Why have you done the sin? The first important thing to realize is that they both shift the blame to somebody else, right? So have a look at the Sforno. The Sforno, one of the great commentaries. So he says, Nostali Menaitz, she misled me. It's her fault. Ashmoso Lekono. And so the Sforno says, by saying that, he's shifting blame to the woman, but also shifting blame to God. In other words, saying Lekono. In other words, he's saying it's your fault. It's not just saying it's her fault. He's saying to God, it's your fault. You gave her to me. We'll see in a minute what he means by that. But what's interesting about this Sforno is Temuras Hatshuva. He says this, Adam and Chava says this instead of the real answer, right? What was the real, in other words, basically, when Adam said it was her fault, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, wrong answer. That's the wrong answer. What you should have said is, what was Shachuva Shahoiso Re'uyolo, the real answer that he should have given, Kemosha Oso David. Interesting. Sforno brings down here David HaMelech. David HaMelech, Ba'omro El Noson. Noson was the Novi, right? Nathan the Novi, the Novi who comes to challenge David HaMelech. Right? You understand, in the ancient world, challenging the king was often a fatal move to do, right? The king had, most kings were not very susceptible to being told off. But the Novi had the right to come to the king, and he told the king that he had done an Aveira, right, by taking Bathsheba, right, the sin of Bathsheba. And what is David's answer? What is the very first word that comes out of David's mouth when Nasan tells him that? Says the Sforno, the first word was Chotossi. His first word is Chotossi. Can you see that? Kemosha also, look at this Sforno here. Kemosha also David ba'omro el Nasan Chotossi. David says to Nasan HaNavi, as soon as he's told you've done an Aveira, Chotossi, which means I've done something wrong and I take full responsibility for it. In a sense, what the Sforno is saying here is that David HaMelech is a tikkun. He comes to remedy the problem of Adam and Chava. Adam and Chava's real Aveira, in addition to having eaten the forbidden fruit, having eaten forbidden fruit could have been easily remedied, says the Sforno, had they turned around and said, Chotasi, right? Because the Torah believes in tshuva. One of the themes which appears again and again throughout the whole Tanakh is that the Torah believes in tshuva. Tshuva is a person accepts responsibility and says Chotasi is what we call vidui. The first move of tshuva is vidui. Why is it so important to say vidui? Vidui is Chotasi of his, right? Oshamnu, Bogadnu, Gozalnu, Dibanu, Dofi, the vidui that we say on Yom Kippur, the vidui that we say in Tachanun. Why is it so important to say vidui? Because saying vidui is taking responsibility for one's actions. Say, you know what, I did this, I made a mistake, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to try and repair the damage that I've done and make sure it doesn't happen again. But the Chotasi element, to own up to something, is the crucial first word. Incidentally, interestingly, the Gemara takes this one stage further. As you all know, in the Tanakh, one of the great dramas surrounding the Melech Israel, the establishment of the monarchy in Israel, was that the first king wasn't David HaMelech. The first king was Shaul, right? And what happens with Shaul? Shaul loses the Malchus. And one of the reasons he loses the Malchus is because when Shmuel challenges Shaul HaMelech, King Saul is challenged by Shmuel and says, look, I told you to get rid of all the sheep and cattle of the Amalekites, but I can hear that they're still alive. So he turns around and he says, the people put pressure on me, and that's why I kept them alive. In other words, Shaul does not say Chotasi. Shaul doesn't understand, right? That what is required of him when confronted with a mistake that he's made is to turn around and say, I take responsibility for this mistake, right? I want to do tshuva. I accept that I've made a mistake. Possibly one of the most difficult sentences for a human being to utter is, I accept that I've made a mistake. But that's video.
Rabbi, can I ask
Yes.
you a question on that? Can it be like it's a process? Like they both had circumstances which made them fall, and they first they were sort of bringing that up, and then after they look deeper, it's like a process, and then you can say chatati.
But it's interesting. It's interesting that what I think what you're saying is how we would normally feel. Maybe that you first start giving excuses. You
Right.
first start, in a sense, coming to terms with your mind that you've done something wrong. But actually, the Sforno says something quite right. The Sforno says what the Torah requires of us is not that. What the Torah ultimately, ideally, if you like, would have been better for Adam and Chava is to turn around and say Chatasi. And because they didn't do that, they lost Gan Eden, right? They had to go through the whole process of leaving Gan Eden and working things through, but the missed opportunity, in other words, having done the Aveira, that's what he's saying here. He's saying what they said was Tumuras Hatshuva Shahaisa Ru'uyolo. What he said was the woman, it was her fault. Instead of saying Kemosha also David, they should have said what David said to Nasan, which was Chotos. So we have a very interesting, there's a lot to be said about this. The connection between Adam and there is actually several midrashic connections between Adam and David HaMelech. One of the midrashic connections is in their ages. I don't know if you've seen that the Medrash says that Adam HaRishon was given a gift to live for 1,000 years. But he saw into the future, there would be someone called David HaMelech, and David HaMelech, so he gave 70 years of his life to David HaMelech. And now David HaMelech lives to the age of 70, and Adam lives to the age of 930, right? Instead of living to the age of 1,000. And this is a midrashic way of using numbers to explain that in some sense, David HaMelech comes and in some way, if you like, atones for or remedies the mistake of Adam and Chava. And this Sforno, this Sforno is explaining to us what that was. I want to mention to you that the Hamek Dov of the Netziv, he doesn't want to be so critical of Adam and Chava. He says a little bit along the lines that Judith was saying just before. So he says, if you have a look at the pasuk, it says, it was her fault. She gave me the fruit, vo'ochel, and I ate it. So the Netziv wants to say that vo'ochel is a type of a vidui. It's true that he is also blaming Chava, but he is admitting what he does. Have a look at the Hamek Dava here of the Netziv. So he says, "Hu kamo vidui." it's a sort of a confession. He's saying, yes, I did the wrong thing. I did eat from it. And look at this. The Netziv compares it to Shaul HaMelech because he says, Chotasi ki ovarti, ki yoresi es ha'om. I did it because I was afraid of what you might call today public opinion. For a leader to be afraid of public opinion, and because of his fear of public opinion, to fail to do what is the right thing to do, that was the problem of Shaul HaMelech. He was too concerned about what they would write about him in the editorials of the press at the time. I was afraid of the people. So it's look at the interesting definition of the Netziv. Hare, you see, Erev. Erev means a mixture. There is here a mixture, and he's comparing Adam Rishon to Shaul HaMelech, right? Both, in a sense, great figures who had, both of them had a tragic fall, right? Both Adam and Shaul could have been immensely great, and they both went wrong. So he's saying both of them, Hari Irev, they mixed together his natzlus, meaning litnatzel, his excuses, with vahavidui, b'yachad. He mixes together the vidui with the excuses. Kach is natzel odom shelo ochal b'shot nefesh chalila. Right? The Adam Rishon is saying, I didn't eat from this tree b'shot nefesh. Shot nefesh, good translation of b'shot nefesh. I didn't eat from the tree just without any conscience, without any second thoughts. I didn't eat from the tree casually. Shot nefesh literally means casually, doing it without any hesitation. Chalila, the Netziv saying, Chalila, God told us not to eat from the tree. I didn't just go and eat from the tree casually after having been told not to. Mikol makom, nevertheless, Harei chotosi, I did sin and eat. So basically, the Netziv is trying to soften this whole problem a little bit. The Netziv is saying there was an element of vidui here, but it was a vidui with excuses, right? Instead of simply saying like David HaMelech Chotasi, right? And that was really what was expected of him. That's how the Netziv sees it. Have a look here at the Ramban. The Ramban says, the Ramban is also trying very hard to, in some way, explain the behavior of Adam Rishon. It's very interesting that actually here we have this great disastrous moment described in the Pasuk of Adam eating from the forbidden fruit, and the Torah doesn't give us any hint of him, if you like, entering into any sort of conflict. Should he eat it? Shouldn't he eat it? To try and eat it? Not to eat it? He just says, "She gave it to me and I ate it." Right? It seems like his answer is, "Well, it's true you told me not to eat it, but she gave it to me and I ate it." What sort of excuse is that? Why is that an excuse? So the Ramban spells out something very interesting. He says, "V'tam ha'isha shenasato imodi." This phrase, says the Ramban, is the crucial phrase. The ha'isha, it wasn't just a woman who gave it to me. It was the woman asher nosata imodi. You HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you gave me this partner in life, kaloma, meaning to say, ha'isha, that woman asher ato b'chavodecha, you in your glory, speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you in your glory, nosata osali, you gave her to me, le'ezer, right? You told me that this woman is an Ezer Kenegdo. She is your assistant, your partner in life. Right? Says the Ramban, he nosnali min ha'etz. She gave me this fruit. And here comes the interesting bit. And I thought, Shekol asher toma elai yearly le'ezer lahoel. I thought that because you gave her to me and you said that she's there in order to assist you in life, I thought it meant that everything she says to you will be positive. That every piece of advice she gives to you is something which is in some sense the right thing for you, right? So in other words, that Ramban tries to spell out a little bit what Adam is saying. Now, Adam is saying, I ate from it unthinkingly because I relied on her completely. Why did I rely on her? Because you told me she was going to be my reliable Ezer connector, my reliable partner in life, right? So so in actual fact, according to the parish of the Ramban, Adam Rishon should have been more circumspect, even about the food that his wife was giving him. The Orach Chaim spells this out a bit more. He says, "V'nirisha kavonas ha'adam hi shlo yodo dovo." Orach Chaim says that Adam Rishon is saying, I had no idea that this was the forbidden fruit. I had no idea. The woman brought me my breakfast, right? And I ate the breakfast that my wife brought me. I didn't feel that I was obligated to ask al habuga shlefonov dava. I'm not sure how this works exactly. I think basically what he's saying here is the whole world is full of permitted fruit. Why would I think that my wife is giving me something which is forbidden? So according to the Orach Chaim, it's very strange. And there is quite a lot in the Meforshim along these lines that actually the Adam eats from the forbidden fruit unwittingly. In other words, he does not know that it's the forbidden fruit. He just is eating the breakfast that his wife is giving him, right? In other words, he's saying, look, in terms of my relationship with Chava, I thought that everything she does for me is completely acceptable and completely good. This is his, it says the Orach Chaim, Me'ata ein biyad Adam ovon elo shogeg. The sin of Adam was b'shogeg, was completely inadvertent, was not b'mezid. He didn't do it purposely. And that's his excuse. I didn't do this purposely. I did it by mistake. And possibly it's even less than shogeg, right? In halachic language, there is shogeg. Shogeg means something which you do by mistake. You wake up on Shabbos morning, you forget that it's Shabbos, and you put the light on. That's shogeg, because you made a mistake. You forgot that it's Shabbos. Ones is something else completely. Ones means it's completely beyond your control. You didn't make a mistake. This was something which was completely outside of your responsibility. So the Orach Chaim wants to ones yeshlo. Hoyelo mokom lo malo. Hoyelo choloses leib lebal techto. It didn't occur to him that his wife would give him for breakfast something forbidden. Because since Chava was given to him from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he thought that she was certainly only going to give him positive things. Ulazeh Timteh makes an interesting final observation here, the Orach Chaim. He says, if you look at the continuing psukim, you will find Shelo Kilel Hashem la'Adam, Elo la'Adam. The punishment that Adam gets, he himself is not cursed. Only the land is cursed. In other words, you'll see later on the language of the punishment that Adam gets is the land will no longer respond to you. you'll have to, with the sweat of your brow, you'll have to extract food from the land, because the land will resist your needs. We'll come back to that maybe at a later stage. Anyhow, I'll call Paul, and you see something very interesting, that the story of Adam and Chava in this sense, right, tells us that Chava really succumbs to some sort of irresistible voice of desire. She succumbs to the Nachash that represents the incredible power of temptation and desire that she couldn't overcome. And in that sense, that was the downfall of Chava. And Adam, his problem is that he's not taking responsibility for his actions. And these two themes come together as really being the weaknesses of human nature throughout the ages. The human nature's susceptibility to being to giving in to the ta'avo la'inayim, right? To giving a primary power to temptations of what we see. We're surrounded by temptations, right? The art of advertising is to convince people to buy things they don't need and they don't want, but they just can't resist. That's how advertisers really define the world of advertising. You've got to try and take something and make it look so attractive and so mesmerizing, right? And in actual fact, she says in her defense, "Hanachosh hishi ani," the snake sort of mesmerized me. I was mesmerized. The power of the Yetzer Hara was so massive that she couldn't resist it, right? And this was the temptations of Adam and Chava at that point. So Adam and Chava were in a world where the power of the Yetzer Hara was massive, and the human being had the weakness of not willing to take responsibility for it. And we see later on, for example, with Moshe Rabbeinu, a contrast to this maybe is Moshe Rabbeinu when he sees an Ish Mitzri beating up a Jewish person. It says, "Vayar ki ein ish." He looked around and he saw that no one was there. And the Meforshim say it doesn't mean that no one was there. Of course, there were lots of people who were there. What he means is "Vayar ki ein ish." It means he saw that no one was going to do anything about it. So he stepped up and took responsibility for it. And that was leadership. The story we're given about Moshe Rabbeinu at the beginning of the book of Shemos, in a sense, is the exact contrast of Adam. Adam refuses to take responsibility. Moshe Rabbeinu takes responsibility for others as well. He sees that no one is going to b'mokom she'ein ish, in a place where no one is taking responsibility, no one is doing what needs to be done. Hishtadel liyos ish, to try and be a person who takes that responsibility, and that is a moment of leadership, right? Whereas here, Adam, in fact, loses his great powers by failing to take responsibility in that sense, and that is part of this drama of Adam and Chava. So, just to summarize for a moment, we've seen the hate described in terms of giving primary power to seeing over hearing. It's the Vatera as opposed to Vayishma. Vayishma, when they're listening, what they hear is the voice of God. And that voice of God they can hear throughout, both before the sin and after the sin. But Vatera, sometimes what our eyes see are so mesmerizing or so attractive that for a moment, the voice of God is eclipsed. The voice of God is obliterated. We can't hear the voice of God anymore. And that really describes the inner life of every human being, right? To hear the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the voice of morality, the voice of right and wrong, as opposed to the temptations of the world of the visual world, which is which is tempting us to go in the wrong direction. So this already from the very beginning is the drama. And also they missed, so that was the first mistake. And the second mistake was not to take responsibility for it. And therefore, the whole story of the unfolding book of Bereshis is more and more about people coming to hear the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, overcoming the temptations of this world and taking responsibility for their life. These are the themes which are developed in Sefer Bereshis, and we'll be speaking more about later on. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. In the meantime, I wish you that, please God, you should have a meaningful Tisha B'Av and Shabbos Chazayin, and reflect on a world that we have lost, the world of Yerushalayim, and that we have lost, and that please one day be returned to us. But in the meantime, remembering Yerushalayim and remembering sitting and reading Eicha is a wonderful mitzvah. It's actually the mitzvah which has connected us to Israel throughout the ages, even throughout the Golus, and has helped us in our generation to return physically to the land of Israel, and we're waiting to return spiritually also, please God, to the land of Israel in the very near future. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you all. Very nice to see you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Kimche.
Thank you very much.